Hello, and welcome back To Lead is to Learn, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of leadership together. Whether you're a returning listener or joining us for the first time, I'm truly grateful you've chosen us as your companion upon your leadership development journey. Our mission here is simple: to empower you with the knowledge, skills, and insights needed to excel in leadership. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to welcome each of you, whether this is your first time or you're a regular listener. Each of you are a valued member of our community. Your trust in us is invaluable, and it's a privilege to contribute towards your growth. Speaking of growth, did you know that To Lead is to Learn is brought to you by Lambda Solutions? At Lambda, we specialize in leadership development and coaching, dedicated to empowering individuals like you to become the best leaders possible. If you're ready to elevate your leadership skills, or if your organization is seeking guidance to achieve its leadership goals, I encourage you to explore the Lambda way by visiting our website at www.thelambda.co.uk to learn more about how we can directly assist you. Thank you for being part of our community. Together, let's continue learning and growing. And remember, following and sharing our podcast can help us grow our community and impact even more leaders. In today's special episode, we will be talking to an experienced leader about their experience of leadership, challenges they have faced, and any thoughts and visions for the future.
The reason that I didn't want to teach was that I loved it, but I didn't love it every day. There has to be a level of human-to-human connection. Our role is to support them to do the thing that they're paid to do. So for me, in every conversation, if it's transformational, there is one moment. Training isn't about what happens right now in the room, it's about the after. But we're not amazing, we're just a catalyst. Because the sound of simplicity is very quiet compared to the sound of complexity. The language of noticing and not diagnosing is absolutely critical. But if I'm trying to be expert over you, how can you flourish? That is such a good question.
Without further ado, here's Claire Pedrick, coach, coach supervisor, mentor coach, and author of one of the most influential and important books on coaching, Simplifying Coaching. So first thing I want to do is start where I start with every one of these discussions, which is to explore your story that got you to where you are today. So how did you come into coaching and then end up with your current position?
How long have you got?
As long as you need.
So I was coaching for nearly 10 years before I realised that I was coaching at all. I trained as a teacher, like what you did.
Yes.
And I got a job in Kenya teaching in a rural secondary school. And when I came back to England, I was the one of my cohort that didn't have a job. And so I was ruining their stats. And so there were various people in the organisation that I'd gone overseas with who were looking for work. Oh, what would be a Claire-shaped job? And a job came up that was called Information and Counselling Secretary for people who wanted to work in overseas development. But there was no counselling anywhere near it because the people who were coming were not talking about the past. They were talking about the future. They wanted information and they wanted a place to explore whether or not working overseas was the right thing for them. So I started that job in 1987, I think. And in 1998, I read an article about coaching and thought, finally, I can explain what I do. So I had a lot of hours in that 10 years. But when I came to then train to be a coach, they went, your hours don't count. So I had to put aside thousands of hours. I started again because it felt like the right thing to do. I trained as a teacher and I felt I should train as a coach. If that was what I was doing, I should train to do it properly. So I trained, I went through all my professional accreditation, and then I backfilled all my hours and put them back in again because they were coaching. So it's all I've ever done since I finished teaching in the mid-80s.
Was it a conscious decision to finish teaching, or was it just because, like you said, you came back and you had no job?
That was a conscious decision.
Hmm.
What I know now that I didn't know then is that it appears that I might have ADHD. And the reason that I didn't want to teach was that I loved it, but I didn't love it every day because I had to do it every day and I didn't find that life-giving. Put me in a classroom. Well, probably I couldn't do it now because I don't think I've got the technical know-how. But, teach a day, amazing. But teach algebra to year 10 every Thursday at 9 o'clock for the rest of your life. No, thank you.
I want to explore the training bit because you'd been doing it for like 11 years and then you decided to train. What did coaching training teach you that you didn't already know?
That is such a good question. And I think how I will answer it now is not the same as how I would have answered it in 1998 when I started the training, because I thought it was teaching me a lot. Mm. But what I know now that I didn't know then is that it was teaching me a lot of things I didn't need to know.
Mm. Yeah.
So it helped me understand what it was to be a coach. And some of the stuff that was in it was really good. But a lot of the stuff that was in it was what I would perceive now to be diagnostic. There was a lever arch file, a massive file of handouts on how to coach every kind of person that you could ever meet. Well, I know now that the answer to that is, how do you coach every kind of person you ever meet? You ask them, what's the best way for us to do that? So that saves a lot of trees.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was really interesting, but honestly, hand on heart, how much of that do I use now? Probably not very much, if any. But there's something about when you're learning that you need to bounce things off against something else. So one of the things it did give me was it gave me something to bounce other learning off. And it enabled me with confidence to say, do I really need to know that much? And now I can with confidence say, no, you didn't really need to know that much at all. And, one of the things that I want now more than anything else is to give people permission to learn the least that they need to know to be able to do this work properly, rather than just endless amounts of knowledge that actually accidentally disempowers the people with whom we're in conversation.
Yeah. I think that is a great sort of entry into your book, because your book, Simplify Coaching, I have literally my copy right here.
There you are.
I think the most powerful part of the front of it is actually not the title, but actually the bit below it.
Yeah.
The how to have more transformational conversations by doing less. And that really speaks into what you said about your coaching training with lever arch files for every different person.
Yeah.
But actually, I would say all you need is this book, your book.
Well, I agree with you, of course. I think the coaching profession has really shot itself in the foot by overcomplicating everything. And I think that the overcomplication gets the world really entangled, because people will spend more and more money learning more and more and more things. And then they'll try and be more and more expert over the people that they're meant to be working in partnership with. But if I'm trying to be expert over you, how can you flourish? It's a very interesting space to be in, I think.
Yeah. I think one of the issues with the coaching world, which, I'm new to it, and one of the issues I've found to it is there is this barrier to entry, which is the cost of training. And everywhere I'm looking and I'm reading about, the training itself isn't necessarily what's going to make me a good coach. It just lets me have that tag. because everything I feel like you need to know is in your book.
Oh, thank you.
So my good friend who's been coaching since the 80s as well, and he was the guy who got me into coaching, he recommended your book to start. And yeah, it is my go-to. And I actually asked him the other day when I was sitting down with him, I was like, are there any questions that you would like to ask Claire? Because I'm literally going to be on a podcast. And he was like, oh, I'm going to have to get back to you. And he sort of went and had a little think. And one of the ones we both wanted to ask is, what led you to writing this book in the first place then? Like your journey from doing your training to then writing this book, where did the decision to write it come from?
Well, I decided not to write it because once I realized that it wasn't as complicated as everyone else said it was, that was a really hard shift to make, because when the story that you're hearing from everywhere is you need to know this and you need to know this and you need to know this, to stand up against that is really hard. Because, you know, to start with, I'm thinking it in my head, surely it's not this hard. Then over time, I got a bit more confident. I was asked to speak at conferences. I was often asked to do a coaching demonstration live in front of the room at quite big conferences. And people were just, you know, really gobsmacked, actually, that you could do so little in a conversation and have such a big impact. And I was often observed by peers who said, I'm really surprised at the impact of what you did. So I began to get a bit more confident that I was right. But stepping out and saying that in the marketplace was huge risk, because the sound of simplicity is very quiet compared to the sound of complexity. Because if I tell you, Chris, to come on a coach training program that's 250 hours, that's going to cost you £6,000, that's great income for me. If I'm going to say to you, actually, 30 hours training would be more than enough for now, and maybe you can add some later, that's not going to make so much money for the provider. So why would people talk about simplicity being a really important way forward? So I only wrote it because McGraw-Hill, the publisher, asked me if I had a book that I wanted to write for them. And I went, well, I have got one I could write. And they said, please write it. But I can remember those few months before it went to the publisher. I went to a conference in the October, and the closing date for the publisher to get the manuscript was April. And I can remember I was in Prague with some work friends at a conference. And I can remember sitting on the castle in Prague with one of them saying, you've really got to write this. And when everybody turns on you, we will stand with you. Because I really thought people would turn on me because I was saying something that was so different from what was being said by everybody else. And the most extraordinary thing was that nobody turned on me. And the thing that I'm a bit cross with myself about is almost to say, of course they didn't. So why did you think they were going to? Because this was a completely different tune. You know, I was making a different tune from the tune that was coming out from the rest of the profession. So I've never said it like that before. So thank you for your question.
That's okay. I think the real thing that sort of goes through the book, which has struck a chord with me, is this concept of doing less.
Yeah.
And in a sense, it sort of marries up with this idea in my head that actually a large amount of holding space, whether that's coaching, whether that's what we might get onto later, which is going to be leadership, a large amount of all of that is about how much can I remove myself and step out of the way of everyone else for them to do their best work, for them to be the best they can be. And I think that's what simplifying coaching to me is. It's telling you, you can coach by doing as little as you need.
Yeah, you can. You can. And any more than that is too much, which is why in our training, we teach people the least they need to know to be able to do this well. Because if you teach them any more, it gets in the way. In coaching, if you do any more than is the minimum required, people start following you. And when they start following you, they're not doing their own learning. So it's a fascinating upside down thing. And I'm shocked at my own surprise. Like now the human behind the coach has come out. I'm back on Amazon checking the rankings every day. And I'm noticing that I'm getting more reviews for simplifying coaching, actually. And the thing that's extraordinary about it is that 3 years on, the sales are increasing because people are going, actually, there's a book here that says all those other books that you feel under pressure to buy and not read, you don't need them.
Yeah. One of the other things as well, which is really interesting, because when we first started this conversation, you said one of the things you know now that you didn't know back then was the fact that you have ADHD sort of thing. And I think the way this book is written actually does make sense in that sense. It's lots of short little snippets you can dip in and out of. It's not like a heavy read. It's like, oh, actually, I want to reflect on something that happened in this coaching conversation I had the other day. You can go to it and go, that was the mistake. Or, oh, that's what I should do next time. So it helps you.
Thank you. One of the reasons that I'm exploring whether I have ADHD is that a lot of the coaches who I supervise or who are in my supervision community are neurodivergent. So I've had a 3-year journey with my supervisor that says, what is it that's attracting not only people who are neurodivergent, lots of the people I work with are neurotypical, but, what is it? And this summer we got to the only thing that's left that we haven't really explored is, am I? And actually it's made, I'm going to find more about it for myself. But if I am, you're right, maybe that's why I wrote it like that. I also had a very good editor.
Yeah. Well, everyone needs a good editor for a book, because you're too in it to see where actually you can drop that.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we're hoping to have a second edition, which will have another chapter in it and which will have more white space, because simplifying coaching and the human behind the coach are the same number of words, and simplifying coaching is almost half the width, because the text is very dense. And actually, I have always wanted it to have more white space. So hopefully that's going to happen.
So exploring that then, I want to ask you a question. What is it about the white space then? Why do you want more white space? What do you hope it will achieve?
There's nowhere to think. When you read a book that's densely printed, there's nowhere to think. Or you've got to suspend your thinking until you get to the next page or to the next gap, or you've got to have a separate thing. But if you're a writer in books, there's nowhere to make your own meaning, actually. It's funny. When I have written a book, I always start writing in my own book straight away, because I notice some things and I build and I make different meaning. And in the human behind the coach, it's in the text. And in simplifying coaching, it's all inside the front cover, and therefore really difficult to work out where it needs to fit. So it's about meaning making.
You want the reader, the person who's got the book, to have the space to make that book mean something to them.
Yeah. And I want them to add their bits and disagree and build on it. Yeah.
So in terms of coaching then, and coaches, so we've explored that actually coaching can be really simple, but when you're taught to coach, it's very overcomplicated. The meaning gets lost in all the words. What are the biggest mistakes that coaches often make, in your opinion?
They rely on their tools rather than on the conversation. And they prepare. Well, first of all, they think my person and not this person. There are many mistakes, but one of them is to think that we're doing it, because we're not doing it. It's the interplay between two people in a dialogue that is making the thing happen. So right now, you and I are co-creating this conversation. So you had thought about it beforehand. I had thought about it beforehand a bit. And yet what's coming out is a better thing as a result of what's going on between us. I had a really interesting engagement this morning on LinkedIn with somebody in India, where a mutual friend said, you two should speak to each other because I think you'd agree. And we're now going to meet in January. But he came back to me and said, if you are doing something to stop new coaches qualifying, thinking they're the answer to everything, then you're doing a good job. Because we're not the answer to anything. We just are able to be catalysts in dialogue with people that helps them to be amazing. But we're not amazing. We're just a catalyst. So that's one thing. Another thing is, the more I do and the more I know, the better coach I'll be. And therefore, I need to get qualified in this tool and this tool and this tool and this tool. But all that does is it means that we're listening to the sound of the tools and not listening to the sound of the individual. So I've got somebody on a course at the moment who's very, very experienced coach, and they're doing our foundation course, which is it's fantastic. And they keep saying how much they're learning. But the other day they asked a question. They said, you haven't taught us about gremlins. Most coach training courses teach you about gremlins. Do you? And I went, no, we don't. Because either you can move forward and you don't fall over anything, or you can't move forward because you have fallen over something. And if you've fallen over something, then we can work out together what to do with that. Giving it a name, calling it a gremlin doesn't mean that you can deal with it. And if you haven't got all those tools, the coach will notice, I'm really interested. Every time we look like we're moving forward, it feels like we get stuck. I wonder what's going on here. Is a much simpler way of going, oh, I think you've got a gremlin. I know what to do about that. Because I don't.
Yeah. I think one of the thoughts that sort of came into my head there, where you said about the tools and they get stuck in the tools. Like, people take a model, a coaching model, let's say the grow model, for example, and they try and impose that on a conversation when actually the grow model may not be the model or the approach that actually would work with them. In which case, the person that you're with can get so caught up in the now that by the end of it, they've not actually got what they're going to do, how to move forward. They haven't made progress.
That's because in the grow model, the reality question is an absolute saboteur.
Yeah.
So I ask you what your goals are, which you may or may not know. And then I ask you what your reality is. And then because that is completely unboundaried, I learn all about your reality, but you don't learn anything you didn't know before. And some coaches will say to me, but they have to tell me their reality because I have to listen for the patterns of the words that they're saying.
Mm.
Well, if they say something a lot, you're going to notice it anyway. Actually, our job is to help them to notice the patterns, not for us to notice them for them. I think, it's a partnership and a collaborative process that can so easily become the coach being the leader and the expert and the person who knows what to do. And if there's one thing I've learned in 35 years, it's that I don't know what to do, ever.
Yeah.
And that we have to work it out together.
There's a beauty and a simplicity in a sense in that, isn't there? Because if you are, let's say, the expert and you're being the coach, you can get so caught up in trying to think of the solution for them.
Yeah.
And then guide them towards that solution. And that's your solution, not theirs.
Yeah. And that solution shows itself up in lots of different ways. So one way it is, I think I've got the answer. Let me help you move towards it. Or another way is, I think I've got the answer to how we're going to think about this. So you're going to do it my way. So there's a thing called Gestalt coaching. Well, there's lots of things called lots of names, aren't there? And I often say to coaches, if you give it a name, you can sell it. That doesn't mean that it's special. It means that it's a useful thing that you can now get money for. So Gestalt coaching, which I like actually, but it's become a really big thing, Gestalt coaching. Basically, it's using stuff to help people look at things. And if you're in a conversation with somebody and they put their hands out and they say, oh, it's all over the place, and if I could just get hold of it, I'd understand it better. That's a signal that maybe getting hold of it so that you can understand it better with stuff is a useful thing. You don't need to have done a Gestalt training to do that. You need to be listening deeply to what the person is telling you is the best thing to do. Because they will tell us. Years ago, I was in a group setting and one of the people said, this would be so much easier if I could stand back and look at it. And the other people who were coaching were going, well, how would we do that? And I said, he just told you what he needed to do. He said, this would be much easier if only I could stand back and look at it. And they go, well, what do we do? I said, well, let's invite him. Would you like to stand back and look at it? And he went, can I? And I went, yeah. So he stood up, took a step back and went, oh, I understand now. That didn't need to introduce, we're now going to do a thing called whatever the thing is going to be called this week. We don't need to introduce the thing. People will tell us how to work with them, but learning and listening to hear that is a lifetime's work. And after coaching demos, when the people who are watching say to me, why did you do that? I'll say to them, what did they say to me? And they never heard it. But I had somebody the other day and he said, I've been sitting on this for such a long time. So I said, well, how about you don't sit on it now? Do you want to stand up? And they went, oh, yeah. But the people who were observing didn't notice that. So really being attentive to what people tell us enables us to know what to do because they'll tell us. But they don't know they're telling us. So we have to really notice.
So you sort of hinted at the beginning of your book about people take you on this dialogue and there's headlines, which is what most people who normally listen will listen to.
Yeah.
But you need to listen to the underbelly and the stuff that's under there.
Yeah.
And I guess what you're saying there is the underbelly, that turn of phrase that they've used that everyone else would ignore, but actually said, okay, why not stand up then?
Yeah. And as you say that, I wonder whether actually that's a bit more attuned. That might be the thing that I listen for at the highest volume. I'm just having an insight. I'll have to write in my second edition in a minute. I don't think that people telling us what to do in the conversation is headline or underbelly, but I don't know what it is, but I'm going to write it down. Yeah.
And when you come up with a turn of phrase for that,
I will accredit it to you.
It's your thinking. I just challenged.
You just coached me.
I'm doing something right then. So in terms of in a coaching conversation, like you're saying, and doing your coaching demonstrations, doing a coaching journey with someone, how do you know when you come out of that conversation that it's been effective?
Because we worked out what would make it effective before we started doing the work.
But couldn't that change?
Oh, it always changes. But if you work out what you're doing before you start doing it, then when you start doing something else, it's really clear because you can see it because you knew which bit you were doing and now you're doing a different bit. So it's really clear. So for me, in every conversation, if it's transformational, there is one moment. And in that one moment, something changes. So in this conversation that you and I are having, I've just had a really big insight, which I've just written down. If this was a coaching conversation, I would be really happy with that and would be really happy to go away because that is probably going to be quite a big game changer. So in every conversation, there's one thing. And the rest of the conversation builds up to the thing. And I think one of the things I want to encourage coaches to do is, if there's been a big thing, don't feel you have to keep doing another thing, because that will minimize the impact of the first thing. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I've just told you that I looked at my whole life in a completely different way. And you've said, is there anything else? I don't want anything else. I want to go home and I want to think about the thing that I've just had an insight into. So really recognizing that there's a thing. Once they've got the thing, what an amazing thing that is. And they're super happy. You can see that you've done a good job because you've seen the transformation happen in their body. So you know you've done a good job, and you don't always, because not everybody has transformation in every conversation. But when it happens, you can see it.
And I guess the skill comes in the experience of noticing when that has happened.
Yeah. So most coaches, actually at many stages of their journey, can be quite artful at getting to the moment where the moment's coming. But the development is to be artful enough to notice and then to wait. Because we can make the moment disappear by talking into it or asking another question or not looking.
I guess in a sense, that's the power of silence, isn't it?
And that's why the whole of chapter 1 of The Human Behind the Coach is about silence. My segue into that was observing coaches coaching and realizing that just because you're not talking doesn't mean you're being silent. So I'd watch videos, particularly post-lockdown. I'd watch videos of coaches facilitating the thinking of somebody else. And you'd see them both on the screen, and the thinker would start to think, which is what's meant to happen. Great work, coach. But the coach would then look at their notes, or they'd look away respectfully, and then they've completely lost connection with the thinker's thinking. And then when they think it's right to speak, they speak. And often they speak right at the moment when the thinker's about to have a moment. But they weren't looking. So looking, and if you are visually impaired, doing the hearing version of looking is a real critical skill of coaches. I think much more than listening.
Yeah. I think there's 2 insights I had from what you said there. One of them, you said about side to side, you're seeing side to side. And I was just thinking the amount of times, I think we're all guilty of it. Like, for example, I've got a picture of us side by side here. You look from the other person to yourself and then back. And really, almost when you're doing a coaching version of this, you should get rid of yourself, because it's not about you at all. It should be about the other person.
Yes. So if you are doing a coaching conversation, you need to just be them on the screen and not you at all. If you're recording it for your development, the art is to be side by side and to put something over you so that you can't see. Because when it comes to reflective practice, how you pass the conversation between you is a really, really important piece of learning, which you can't see if only one of you is on the screen. So a nice big piece of cardboard that covers up your side of the screen is a useful thing, I think. Yeah.
That's good.
What was your other one?
The other one was actually, we'd built up towards the importance of silence. And I then made a link back to where you said white space in the book.
Oh, yeah. White space is silent. And you see, that was really good timing that just happened there, because you just waited for me to make sense of your offer. Thank you.
Did you know that Lambda Solutions is your gateway to unlocking the secrets of effective leadership, as well as exploring leadership psychology? We not only have this podcast where we explore some of the most topical concepts within leadership and connect you with the wisdom and experience of a community of leaders, we also have a growing treasure trove of leadership wisdom just waiting to be discovered. I would love to invite you to explore the Lambda Library, our very own hub of thought-provoking articles and blogs, carefully crafted to spark your imagination, challenge your thinking, and ignite your leadership potential. The best part? It's completely free, and we are continually looking to update our content to keep you engaged and informed. It's all part of our dynamic journey of learning, and we can't wait for you to join us. Whether you're a budding leader, a seasoned professional, or simply looking to enhance your leadership skills, our content caters to your growth. We would also like to extend our hand. If you have a message to share and would like to submit an article to our library, Simply get in touch through the contact form on our website. We would love to add your wisdom to our leadership library. Are you ready to begin your exploration? Simply visit our website at www.thelambda.co.uk and navigate to the Lambda Library. You'll find our growing library of leadership articles waiting for you. You can then add us to your bookmarks to supplement your sources of consistent, high-quality leadership content. Discover insights, uncover strategies, and elevate your leadership game. So I want to steer it towards what I originally sold this conversation to you about, which was looking at coaching in a leadership perspective. So this podcast is all about, leadership and learning and growth for leadership. And I have different episodes, ones where it's just me going through an idea, and then there's ones where there's conversations. And I wanted our conversation to be about, because you're all about simplifying coaching and how easy it is, can we work with leaders who are listening to this conversation to change or at least adapt their approach to be a more coaching approach? So my first question about this for you is, how do you believe that leaders could embrace coaching to improve their practice? And how would that achieve better performance, better growth?
Been writing about that today. I think leaders need to have a skill of a number of different ways of engaging with people. A number of years ago, we did quite a lot of work around leadership in the NHS, and there was a huge amount of research that said, I think it was about having 4 leadership styles made you a better leader, and you needed to be fluent in 4, and it didn't matter which 4. So the art is being able to move into a variety of different leadership styles in one conversation. And I think that the development for leaders is recognizing what is our preference and also doing some artful work on how we move between them with consent or with permission. So the leader who says, I'm going to coach you now, isn't, because you've just told them what you're going to do, and coaching is about partnership. So if you can have a really honest partnership conversation about how to have a conversation with a colleague in different ways, that can make a really significant difference. So it might be that at the beginning of the conversation, I say to you, so Chris, in our one-to-one today, what are the things that you want to talk about? And you say, well, there's this and this and this. And I say to you, so it sounds like some of them are me giving you information. It sounds like it might be useful if I support you to think about some of the stuff yourself. So you can negotiate your way through the conversation using all the stuff that's in simplifying coaching, even if none of it is pure coaching. But it's about doing a bit and then saying, have we finished that bit? Oh, yeah. Okay, so if we're going to talk about this next bit, which is the next bit we need to talk about? It's this bit. So how will you know in 10 minutes' time that we've moved that forward a bit? Oh, well, I'll know this. So negotiating how we're doing the work through the conversation is using some core stuff from coaching in a very light way. I'm really interested about it because after all these years, we've done a lot of training of leaders or managers to use coaching skills, and we've just thrown it all out the window. And we've now done a video set, which people can access on our website, actually, which is about, here are the challenges that leaders and managers face. Here are some game changers that will help you to have a better conversation. Oh, by the way, that's coaching. Because as soon as you say to leaders, I think, a coaching style might really help you, then you can get into, and it's very special and you need to know a lot about it. So one of the 8 game changers is the best coaching question in the world, which is which bit? So I'm a leader, you work for me, and you say, I need to talk to you about this project. And I say to you, so which bit of that is the bit that we need to focus on in this conversation that we're having today? And how will you know by the end of this conversation that we move that bit on a bit? You don't need a PhD in coaching to be able to use which bit. And it's an amazing phrase.
And almost what you talked about there is the creating the container that you mentioned in the book. You've established what the end's going to be.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And you just have little containers that go through the conversation. And some of them is one of us telling the other one or reporting back. But constantly renegotiating through the conversation is hugely valuable. And that's not the same as an agenda. Because it might be that I came with a list and you're my leader. But after we've talked about the second thing on my list, the fifth thing on my list might not be a thing anymore. So I don't want us to go there because actually I know the answer to number 5 because I worked it out when we were talking about number 2. So flexibility, I think, really matters. And the capacity to not coach when it's not the right thing.
Yeah. The first time I came across coaching in leadership was within situational leadership, where it has the 4 types: the direct, the coach, the mentor, and the delegate. And I feel like you're almost talking a little bit like that, of which quadrant do I go in this conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. And we agree together, except sometimes the leader has to pull the leader thing. I remember years ago, one of my colleagues, we had a very coaching style relationship and we had a disagreement. And she said, I'm going to do this. Something had happened in her personal life. And she said, I'm still going to do this work. And I said, as your line manager, I am telling you, you are not. Because I had to make it really clear that on that occasion, in that moment, I was pulling rank, because actually I was pulling rank in service of the people that she was going to work with, because my perception was that what had just happened was too much of a risk for her and for them, and that somebody else needed to go in. So being clear when we're not coaching is as important as being clear when we are.
So how much does that relationship depend on the ability to communicate?
The ability to communicate is really important, but I think the ability to negotiate roles through the whole conversation really matters.
Mm.
So again, years ago, we were working in an organization that had a matrix management structure, and somebody came on our coaching course and they reported in the matrix to a number of different people, all of whom had done the coaching training and were very good at coaching. And she arrived and she said, this coaching thing drives me mad, because I go to my line managers and say, I need to know what you think. And they say, well, what do you think? And she said, I know what I think. I want to know what they think. So negotiating our way into that is really, really important. And being clear that sometimes people want a steer. I mean, my husband's just gone to buy the food for dinner. You know, you can't endlessly go, well, what would you like for dinner? Well, what would you like? In the end, somebody has to go, this is what's in the fridge. The only thing we can have is this.
So if someone's leading and they've got a one-to-one coming up and they're going to take this approach, obviously, if it's the first time it's happening, there needs to be some form of framework set out. That might be the first 20 minutes of the hour, just going, this is how we're going to try and work together moving forwards. What should that conversation involve in your idea?
Well, I would say be careful of telling people how coaching works. Because as soon as you tell people how coaching works, you're teaching them, and you're teaching them that you're not going to teach them. And that's very, very confusing. So I think a staged approach. So if you are in a work relationship with somebody and it's always been that they want you to tell them what to do, I think there's an art to say, I'm really happy to tell you what to do today, but maybe next time we meet, I'll support you to think about it for yourself for a bit. But something that says we're doing a transition, because there's nothing more annoying than a line manager or a leader with the cause, is there? Who's just been on a course and it starts doing the thing to everybody is really, really annoying. So a level of normalness about the thing, which is why I think that speaking English or whatever your native language is in a coaching conversation is really important. Because as soon as you start using jargon, it sounds as though you're doing something to somebody else. That's why I love the question, which bit? Rather than what is your highest measure of success? Which bit of this do you want to talk about, Ben?
Yeah. I think you're right. If someone suddenly starts changing the way they are, it doesn't seem genuine. It throws you off.
Yeah.
And everyone is resistant to change. So if suddenly you're experiencing change, it's like, no, back's against the wall. I'm not doing this.
They're weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Another way in, Chris, is to change the language of issue and problem to the language of question. So instead of saying to your direct reports or the people in your team or whoever, so what's the problem? You say, so what's the question? Because if you do that, they'll start thinking about what the question is straight away. And instead of coming in a passive way, which is a receiving way, I am bringing you my problem, I want you to give me the answer. If you say to me, so what's your question about that? I'll start thinking. And if coaching is facilitating someone else to do thinking, if we can encourage them to start thinking as they arrive, then that's a really great thing.
Yeah. And that's one easy question that can be used again and again and again and again.
Yeah. So what's your question about that? So this is a stupid one, but at lunchtime, we inherited a nutmeg mill when my dad died, and I want to clean it up. And in order to clean it up, I need to be able to take a nut off the top. And I said to my husband, how can I open this nutmeg mill? Well, it's got different places you can open it. And he said, what's your question? And I said, my question actually is, how do I take this one nut off the top without damaging the metal of this bit? That has a much easier way of exploring, because then we were able to say, well, which tool is the best tool to do that with that is least likely to make damage to the metal? Whereas if I'm just going, well, I can't open it, which is what I had been saying, he goes, well, I don't know what you want from me.
And in a sense as well, by challenging what's the actual question, it gets to your thinking, which opens up an understanding between the two people. And then also, if I'm the person guiding, I might, if I think in my head, okay, maybe there's another way of doing this, but I don't want to tell you, I could say, okay, what other options could we have? Because then I'm opening your mind up to other ideas as well.
Yeah, or leaders. I think one of the things that leaders can really beautifully do is to show the working out. That's the maths teacher in me, you see, Chris. So, you know, as a leader, somebody will come to you and say, what do I do about this? If you say to them, is it useful if I tell you how I would think about that? Some of the things I would think about might be this or this or this. Now you've heard that. What do you think is the question? Again, that gets us into a different quality of conversation. Because often we can get into a very transactional relationship at work, can't we? How do I do this? You do it like this. Or you do it like I do it. Whereas, how about I just tell you how I think about it is a very different thing, and it breeds capacity in the organization in a different way.
Yeah. And I guess in a sense, what you've done there is, if we're taking a leader in a coaching stance, they've asked for permission to come out of coaching. They've gone into mentoring and they've come back into coaching to say, what do you think about it?
Yeah. And I would just say, don't use jargon to describe any of that. You know, I can tell you, or I can help you think about it, is a much better thing than, would you like me to mentor you or coach you? Which feels a bit doing too.
Yeah.
It's finding language that works for you, that doesn't feel weird, that enables you to move between different ways of working.
So that's a one-to-one. That's your line manager meetings that you can have. That's a great way to approach, and a way that people listening could actually try and tomorrow without throwing off their team. What about if they're working with a group then? How could they bring coaching into that?
With a group, you need to be really careful, because you can get into abuse of power really quickly if you assume the role of coach, because coaching has an appropriate distance in that we are facilitating other people to do processing. But if you take that distance with your team, you're taking yourself out of the team or the group that you're part of, and it can be really, really irritating. So I think the art is to throw coaching style questions in, but then not distance yourself to notice what's going on. Because if you distance yourself too much, the distance is having the opposite impact from the facilitating of the thinking, which is why for team coaching, you need somebody coming in from outside. But you can use coaching questions in a meeting quite easily. And I think introducing them as useful questions to use and then fully engaging in the using of them is a much more useful thing than that distancing thing, which is a bit odd.
I guess within the abuse of power bit comes as well, if they didn't remove themselves. So now we've got the picture, they are within the meeting, they've put the questions out. The one thing that leaders also probably need to be aware of is the power that their words carry.
Yeah.
So if they were to shut down an idea or they were to put out an idea, immediately you change the thinking of the group because you hold that power.
Yeah. And this is a bit of a spoof, but people can make their own meaning of it. It's like a new leader comes in and you have a team building day in the morning and say, what's our vision for the team? And then you have a nice lunch. And then after lunch, the new leader comes in and takes a card out of their pocket and says, this is my vision. So what we did in the morning was a way of getting to know each other. It wasn't a vision building exercise, which is fine as long as it's clear it wasn't a vision building exercise. So clarity about what we're doing at any time is really important.
Mm.
If I tell you a story, so I walked the Camino in Spain about 18 months ago. And me being me, I hadn't really thought about what it was going to be like. I'd thought about what I was going to wear on my feet and what I was going to put in my rucksack. I hadn't really thought about what it was going to be like. And on the first day, as we started walking, I realized that it was going to be a place where people told their stories. It was a beautiful place for me to ask questions and, help people think, all the things that I love doing in my work life. But I also realized that if I did that too much, I would never be known. So I would be coaching others, but they would never get to know me because I would be a little bit distanced. So I had to commit to not coaching. And several weeks in, 3 or 4 weeks in, we met a walking friend who just kept appearing. And we did have a more coaching kind of conversation, but that was based on us having a pre-existing relationship. But questions are great, but they don't give much of ourselves. And there are situations in teams and in organizations where actually giving a bit of myself is more important than asking a question, because it's about human connection, isn't it?
Yeah. And I guess with giving a bit of yourself, you open up not only the two-way street, but you open up this pathway for empathy in both directions.
Yeah. Relationships are based on giving and taking. And if we are purely coaching at work, we are keeping ourselves outside and inviting people to disclose and be vulnerable whilst not doing it ourselves. And that doesn't work.
And I guess something you said earlier as well, you said you used two terms, which was leader and managers. You mentioned both of them. Now, I'm a firm believer that they're two completely different roles.
Yeah.
And they do interplay, but they're completely different. But I want to ask what your opinion is of that.
So I think for me, leaders cast the vision and have the organization go where it needs to go, and managers do a really brilliant job of the operational stuff. That would be a very simplistic view.
Could they be the same?
I think they can be, because a small organization, it has to be. But I think giving space to both is really important. I mean, interesting, in our organization, where I'm now not the managing partner, somebody else is, she's much better than I am at recognizing that we default to operational all the time, and that we need to take time out in a different space to do strategic and vision, because as soon as we're in a room where anything operational is making any kind of a noise, we're on it. So I think it can be the same person, but I think managing those together and giving the right weight to the right things requires a discipline that I don't have, but my colleague does.
So when we think about coaching, I guess, in your view, would come in more of the leader's way of doing things. I guess a manager, would they be able to use coaching as effectively?
Yeah, I think anyone can use coaching. I think it's just a really good thing to have in our arsenal of the way that we operate. I've just done a podcast with a woman who's homeschooled her 6 children. And the whole podcast is about using a coaching style in home education. And she didn't know it was coaching. We met at an event where I'd spoken and wanted a coffee, and she was making the coffee. And instead of going to a session, we sat down and had this most extraordinary conversation about home ed. So I invited her to come on the podcast, because everything she was talking about is coaching. So you can use it in all sorts of places, but not all the time.
I guess if you're training someone, or you're doing, like you're suggesting there, someone's homeschooling someone, if you are in a position where you hold the knowledge and they need to gain the knowledge, you can't do the coaching all the time, because otherwise the knowledge is never going to pass that way.
You need to listen to this episode. It's really interesting.
I guess the question for me right now, for our listeners as well, in that sense, would be, when in that, let's say you're running a training program, when would you use coaching within that?
So for me, when I'm training, I use a coaching style all the time. So I will constantly be supporting the learners to reflect and to make meaning of what's going on. For me, in training, if it's the transferring of knowledge from one person to the other, you might as well read it or listen to it on an audiobook if that's your preference. So for me, in a training context, the question is, how do we really support this to do what you need it to do in order to learn what you need to learn? And therefore, a facilitated conversation, which actually looks like coaching, for me, is what I would personally do.
Yeah, facilitation was what I had in my thoughts as well. So
yeah, facilitated learning, where you probably do throw some stuff in, but you throw in the stuff that's relevant rather than everything.
So I guess in that sense, you're starting with identifying the need, like the problem, and then you're putting in, okay, how would you use this idea? And then stepping back.
My opening question in most training sessions is, how will you know by the end of today that this has been useful? Or actually, more significantly, how will you know in 6 months that this has been useful? And therefore, what do we need to do today to get you to that point? Because for me, training isn't about what happens right now in the room. It's about the after, the impact.
So I had another question, which I thought of coming into this discussion, which I wanted to explore with you. And it came from obviously reading your book and another idea that I really do believe is valuable as well, but I can see they're separate. I feel like I can see where they come in. One is coaching being forward thinking, and it's establishing now, and it's forward thinking, it's moving forwards, and there's motion in that direction. The other one is the power of reflection and feedback. So reflection and feedback is always looking backwards, whereas coaching is looking forwards. Can you marry the two? Should you marry the two? Should you keep them as completely separate things?
I think you can marry the two easily, and it's about the direction that you do it in.
Mm.
So coaching is future focused and optimistic. So it's so what next?
Yeah.
The danger of going backwards is that you keep looking backwards. So why did that happen? What made you do that? So if we were reflecting on a coaching conversation that you had yesterday, I would say to you, so in your mind's eye, if you sit in that conversation, what do you notice? And therefore, what can you do differently for next time? So it's got a forward-looking view rather than a backward-looking view. So I will invite somebody to move to the past or the recent past or the very far past, but to stand there looking forwards rather than to stand there looking backwards. So doing that can make a really significant difference. And one of the issues about reflection, particularly for coaches, is that reflective practice is very important. But reflective practice can very quickly become entirely anecdotal data, and it's not observable. So it's self-reported data. So they did this and I did this. I think they did that, and I think I did this. But that's self-reported. That's not real. So getting ourselves into real observable data is a really important thing when we're using reflection. So I will often say to people, what did you see rather than what did you do? Because they might be able to access what they saw, but when they say what they did, they'll say what they remembered they think they thought they did, which isn't the same.
If we're talking about leaders, for example,
yeah,
one of the large bits about leaders is they would have collected data, they monitor data, they observe things, and there has to be some form of feedback mechanism. And often in the one-to-one discussions, that's when the feedback's going to happen. And we're saying from our discussion that we can have a coaching approach to that. So I guess in a sense, what you're talking about is you're front loading that reflection and that feedback with the concept that actually we move then into coaching and going forwards into what could be different next time.
Yeah, and I think one of the great gifts of the leader is to be able to say to a colleague, can I say what I see? Or can I say what I saw? But the art of saying what we see is to only say what we saw and not say what our interpretation of that was. And that takes discipline, because normally we've got an opinion. So keeping reflection in real observable data is an absolute gift for the leader.
In that conversation, when should a leader say and share what they saw, and when should they ask the person they're having the meeting with what they saw?
Ask them. My mum always said visitors first. So I would always ask the other person, what did you see? Or what did you notice? Or what did you observe when that happened? Can I say what I saw? There's something about power, isn't there? So there's always going to be a power differential. But if we take the power and endlessly go first, then the power differential is going to be bigger. So how do we keep as much equity in the relationship as we are able to really matters.
I think that's a really important point, that by inviting them to go first, You haven't imposed your opinion on them. And in essence as well, we're also engaging in that fight or flight response. If we go first and we give them loaded feedback saying, we observed this, they're immediately going to be back against the wall going, okay, I need to justify that. I need to say why I did that. I need to fight for my job. We've changed the dynamic detrimentally.
Yeah, completely. And, when we train people to use a coaching approach, every single time we give feedback, the person who is the most vulnerable gives feedback first on themselves. One thing I did well and one thing I could develop. So the coach starts, this is what I think I did well, and this is what I think I could develop. So that if they had a complete car crash, they can say that before anyone else goes, well, that was a complete car crash, which is the last thing they need to know, because of course they know that's what happened. So enabling people to own it for themselves before somebody else goes, oh, that was terrible, really matters. Because we want the people we work with to have their agency, to be the best that they can be all the time. And as you say, in terms of fight or flight, it's very easy to accidentally disempower somebody.
In terms of, if we say, okay, they've gone first, and I love the way you said it earlier, the fact that, can I share mine? You ask permission to share your own feedback. If your feedback is marginally different to theirs, that's then going to establish the rest of the conversation. What if their response and their observations were wholly positive? Yours was, okay, that's very different to what I've got. How would you then recommend, in order to not destroy that relationship, how would you recommend establishing the rest of that conversation? Because I don't think people are trained well enough to do that.
I think the more we can keep it in the observable, the better. So it might not be that what I saw is the next thing to say, but it may be that I say to you, so I wonder what that colleague who was standing next to you saw, heard, sensed. One of the things that we train people to do is to use objects to help facilitate thinking. But sometimes objects can also be useful to help facilitate feedback. So instead of me saying to you, Chris, I just saw you do this, and you go, I didn't do it, is to say, can I just say what I saw? So just take some stuff, whatever you've got around you. So I saw this and I saw this, and I wonder how that was experienced by that person. So I can remember a beautiful moment in the NHS, in a hospital we were working with a lot to train their leaders to use a coaching style. As a result of teaching them to do this, one of them said, I know that there was an issue on the ward last night. Can I tell you what I saw and heard? What I heard was a loud noise outside of a patient's bay. And I heard raised voices. And I wonder how that was experienced by the patient. And what do we need to do differently so that we're doing the best that we can do for the patients? What the person had said was the presenting issue was, these colleagues don't get on and they shout at each other all the time. But engaging in the feedback in that way wasn't working. So the art there was to bring another stakeholder into the observation and not say that patient complained about you, because they didn't, but just to say, I wonder how it was experienced by them. So to be curious and to be interested and to look around a situation at what other people might notice can be a really useful strategy.
Mm. I think that's a really powerful tool as well, because there are some people that struggle to remove themselves from themselves.
Yeah.
No matter what question you pose, but by using a prop, be it another patient or using something in terms of just setting it out in front of them, sort of helps them go, okay, well, I'm standing there, so what about there? It takes them outside themselves and it's not relying on their imagination to do it.
Exactly. And what happens is, instead of us talking about it eye to eye, as it were, where one of us probably feels quite threatened or anxious, we step back and we look at it together. We say, actually, well, what do we notice here that we need to be learning from? So it becomes, rather than you and me, it becomes we. And we have to completely stay in an inquiring role together to be able to do that.
I guess just even looking at the fact that if you're both sitting down and you're both looking down, you are both in a position of being higher, which in a sense can establish that we are on the same level and we're looking down, we're looking on. And I know coaches talk about working in and on something. So we're working on that.
Yeah. Yeah, we're looking from a distance, and distance often helps us to notice things in a different way. Because we're humans and we have feelings and all of those good things that can sometimes get right in the way.
Are there any words that should be avoided then, in terms of it may elicit those responses from people which aren't helpful? Are there any words or phrases or things that you think right now off the top of your head should not be used?
Well, I think I messages are much more powerful than you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I see this, I experience it as that is a much stronger message than you always do, whatever. So it's about how do we use language that we would like to receive? You know, as much as possible, what does collaboration sound like so that we actually feel like we're all on the same team? Yes, so the language of noticing and not diagnosing is absolutely critical. And that takes a lot of work. I do it at work all the time. But then if I'm out in the street and I see somebody coming at me with a face, I'll go, they're really angry. That's diagnostic. So at work, I can go, I noticed this. But out there, you want to go, you're in a really bad mood. Because we're humans and we can't be on that sharp all the time.
Unlock your leadership potential with personalised one-to-one coaching from Lambda Solutions. Take the first step to empowering yourself to overcome any challenges and lead your team to new heights. Our coaching services provide consistent support tailored to your goals and challenges, guiding you through the uncertainty and leading to growth. But that's not all we offer. Our consultancy services extend beyond coaching, encompassing a comprehensive approach to leadership development. Explore our bespoke consultancy packages, which include coaching as a fundamental component. Or if you're seeking something even more tailored, contact us directly through our website to build a solution perfectly suited to your organisation's needs. Visit www.thelambda.co.uk to discover how Lambda Solutions can help you to reach your leadership potential. Together, let's learn, grow, and elevate your organisation to a new level of success. Obviously, the work environment, we can have a lot of emotion involved in it, and that could be carried from home life. It could be whatever's happening right there. So emotion can therefore cause us to react in very different ways. And you've just identified, you can't be on it the whole time. So I guess it's very simple, the whole 10 seconds before you do something, but that can seem a little off-putting in a work environment where you need a quick response, you need to move things through as pace. So what advice do you have for leaders that can help keep that emotional side away? Because if you're in a coaching conversation, you don't want that emotional input.
I think we need to acknowledge that we all are all emotional beings. Nancy Klein says that while we're experiencing a high level of emotion, we can't think. And until about 3 weeks ago, I had always thought about that in relation to the thinker or the person who's being coached. And I suddenly realized about 3 weeks ago, after quoting it endlessly forever, is that actually that's also true for me. If I'm experiencing a high level of emotion, I can't facilitate the thinking of another. I have a buying time strategy in the workplace, not as a coach, as a person who goes to work, where I go, can you ask me that tomorrow when I think you'll get a much better version of me?
Mm.
So negotiating a shift of time and explaining what that's about, it's easy to go, I can't talk about that now, is a very confusing message. Whereas if you say, let's talk about this tomorrow when you'll get a better version of me, that's actually explaining what the time delay is about and is a more compassionate response, I think. So it's another version of showing the working out.
And that doesn't even have to be a day's delay.
No.
Could be, can we just check back in 5 minutes? I've only just got in.
Yeah. My mind is absolutely full of something else. And this will be a better conversation when I've just gone and put it down.
Yeah. And I think sometimes showing vulnerability as a leader like that gives permission for others to show vulnerability as well, which makes it a much better place to work because we are all realize each other's human.
Yeah. And when I demonstrate that I'm human, I'm enabling you to be human too. Whereas I can accidentally begin to look like some, I don't think I ever could, but it is possible as a leader to look as though you're pretty impermeable and pretty perfect. Actually, nobody's pretty perfect.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, because I had a discussion with someone the other day on a podcast, and they were saying how the view sometimes upwards can seem like you are perfect, like you've got it all sorted out, like you've been able to climb your way up the ladder, so therefore you must be what I need to aim for.
That's why it's really important to me to say, which I said to you earlier, which is not every coaching session that I do is brilliant, because it isn't. And when I say that to coaches, they go, oh, thank goodness. And I hope I didn't suggest that they always were, but I think sometimes you have to name that. None of us always have a great day. Vulnerability there's a whole chapter on vulnerability in the new book. And that's because if I want the person that I'm working with to be vulnerable, why ever would they be if they thought I never could? They're not going to, because that is really one-sided. Expose yourself entirely to me, Chris, and I'm going to be absolutely like a concrete block. There has to be a level of human to human connection.
I want to play with something for a moment here.
Let's do that.
So we've got a leader follower having a one-to-one, and we've talked to the leader of, coaching approach and all the different leadership approaches they could have. If you're the follower, could the follower use a coaching approach managing and leading upwards? And if so, how?
Yep. So one of the issues I notice a lot at work is that direct reports get frustrated at the end of a one-to-one because they go into the one-to-one and they have one or two things that are really important. But if the person that they report to doesn't ask them, what do you want to bring? Then they don't bring it. And then they going, well, I didn't get the answer to the thing that I wanted. So the art is to use the right sizing that we use in coaching in a slightly different way. So I would be respectful. So I'd say to you, Chris, you've probably got some things that you want to talk about in our one-to-one. I've got a couple of things. And actually, by the end of this conversation, it would be really helpful for me if I had got this or the other. So you're naming the destination that you would hope to get to. Because one of your issues, of course, with busy people is that busy people will answer the question they think they have been asked. So I'm your direct report and I say, I need to talk to you about the launch event for whatever in 2 weeks' time. And you go, yeah, because we need to think about this and this and the other. And my question is, what's the dress code? Do I come in smart casual or do I have to go and get myself some special clothes for the event? If that's my question, I need that answered. I don't need you to tell me all the things that you're thinking about. So right-sizing the work as the person who's come into the one-to-one is a really useful thing. And to respectfully say, I'm sure you've got things you want to talk about with me. This is what I want to talk about. And by the end of the conversation, I'll know this has been useful because I will.
I guess it's establishing that partnership.
Yeah.
Whether that's the leader establishing it with the direct report or the direct report establishing it with the leader. And if you're both doing it, great.
Yeah. We can help people work with us if we tell them the bit that is going to be the useful bit. And they might want to also give us some other stuff. But if we can say what the useful bit is, that makes all the difference in the world. So when we're asking for feedback, instead of asking for feedback, be specific. So I'm sharing this document with you. What I'd really like to know is, do you think that the first bit explains what the rest of it's about? Or I'm concerned about this kind of reader. Help me sense check whether we've got this right or whatever. But clear.
Yeah. It's clear and specific as well, isn't it? And that makes it so much easier to work with someone when you know the bounds that you have to work with them.
Yeah.
And I think in a way as well, if someone, a direct report, is doing that, as a leader, you're going to be like, this person's so easy to work with. And then should a job or position come up, they're obviously going to be the first thought in your mind, because it's like, well, this person's really good. They know how to work with people. So let's put them.
Yeah. Really specific.
Yeah, I like that. I think we've explored a lot. Is there anything else that you think a leader should hear about coaching and a coaching approach that we haven't yet explored?
I just want to go, you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be open to a dialogue. And a dialogue is about giving and receiving. And you don't need to know how to have this conversation today with this person, because you can work it out together. And that isn't a demonstration of weakness. You know, what's the best way for us to think about this together today is a great question. And if you're going to ask questions, you need to not have a fully formed solution in your pocket. So if I say to you, what's the best way for us to have this conversation today? I have to not have already decided how we're going to do it. So it's about transparency, isn't it? It's about vulnerability, and it's about dialogue.
And as a leader as well, not having that solution, or even if you have it, not imposing it on someone, is very empowering. And that's what we want in the workplace as well.
Yeah. So Michael Bungay's Dania in The Advice Trap says that, you know, often as leaders, we think that everything will fall apart if we don't have the answer. And therefore, we've been hardwired to build the answer into ourselves. But when we have the answer, what we're actually demonstrating is we don't think that the person who's paid to have the answer has the capacity to get it for themselves. And that we have to fix it, solve it, sort it. But we don't. Our role is to support them to do the thing that they're paid to do. But that requires enormous trust in the capacity of colleagues to do the thing that they need to do. But we work in some organizations with leaders and, you know, across organizations where the organizational system has failed to learn how to think. So people are just endlessly asking someone else to tell them what to do because they've learned that that's what they need to do. So it takes a lot of energy to change the dynamics of the organization, but it only starts with one conversation. Slowly, you can begin to shift it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I have a closing tradition on my podcast, which is where I ask the guest if you were to go back and talk to a younger you, or there's a younger person listening to this right now who's in the position that you were in, what one piece of advice or one thing that you've learned from your journey that you would share with a younger you or that person who's listening?
Hold your nerve, be yourself, and trust the process. That's what I'd say.
Why?
Because all those years that I thought it wasn't that complicated, I didn't have the confidence to stand up and say that more publicly, because I thought I'd be shot down, because the narrative that I was hearing in the industry was that how could I be right when everyone else was saying something else? And, you know, part of me wishes I'd said it earlier.
But it ended up with this fantastic book.
Oh, thank you. That wasn't meant to be a segue back to plug in the book, Chris.
But the fact you've got a new version coming out soon as well. So that means that people listening, maybe hold fire and wait for the second edition.
Oh, it'll be at least a year before the second edition comes out. But there is going to be another chapter, because one of the issues about simplifying coaching is I think that people, they right size the conversation too quickly and they go, boom, 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 boom. These are questions we have to answer before we can do the work. And I just want to encourage people to soften a bit. Yeah, so the new chapter is going to be about the beginning and it being a bit more integrated and a bit less sounding like a machine gun.
So I guess our listeners can go and buy this version and then in a year's time buy the second version.
You can buy second-hand ones now.
And hopefully someone's put some writing in there and you can learn from their reflections on it as well.
Indeed.
Because I do remember actually on LinkedIn, there was, I think you had sent out a version of one of your books that you had written in, hadn't you?
Oh, I never got it back.
You still haven't. So if anyone's listening who has that book.
I gave up in the end. I've put out that plea and it never came back. So I've started another one because it was a signed copy. That was the problem. So I've written where I sign the book. This is Claire's copy, so that I don't accidentally sign my book. But I'd already done it before with Simplifying Coaching. That was the funniest thing. And that would have been much more serious because the Simplifying Coaching one, the one that I'd got with Simplifying Coaching, I'd had for about 18 months before I accidentally put it in an envelope.
And I guess they're personal reflections on the book. And, you know, you kind of want to keep that as your personal journey with that book.
They're actually pretty illegible scribbles, but they are all things that need to be built on or changed or tweaked, either in when I talk about the book or in a future edition. Because, you know, one of the challenges of writing a book is that 2 months after it's come out, I've had 10,000 other ideas that would be better than the ones that went in the book. But that's how it is. That's what learning does for you.
And I guess within book writing as well is if you really wanted it to be perfect, you would never release it, because you're always going to be revising it. So that's why you have your version 1, your updated version and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean I'm going to do a second edition of every book that I've written, but it means that at least I've got the learning there.
Yeah. But that's an important lesson for life, isn't it? At some point, you've got to let something go and you can always keep developing on it, but you're going to have to, at some point, expose yourself.
Yeah. And it only needs to be good enough. It doesn't need to be perfect, in the same way that when we ask questions in conversations, they don't need to be brilliant. They just need to do a good job.
Yeah. Just as a sort of side note on that one, I guess it might be you ask a question and that person says something back. A great question could be, was that the right question to ask? So
the other day, we were running our presence training, which is a great training actually for leaders and coaches, but we do improv and 6.5 hours CPD and so much laughing. I mean, it's almost entirely laughing, but the improv teacher asked them to do something and 2 of them did something else altogether, which was so funny that I couldn't actually gather myself enough to do the plenary bit because I was laughing so much. But the thing that was most extraordinary about that was they made it their own and they did a really good piece of work, which was totally not what they were asked to do. But, you know, in coaching, sometimes people will ask a different question from the one that we asked them. But where they get to is extraordinary. So we can just abandon. But I think we often get a bit diligent and go, oh, you didn't answer the question I asked you. It doesn't matter. My questions were just to facilitate you to think and get new insights.
Mm. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for all of your wonderful insights and applications. And
oh, thank you.
We got so much value out, and I hope you got value out as well.
Oh, that was great. I've had some insights. So who's your guru?
My guru, Carl Taylor. I don't know if you know of Carl Taylor. Yeah, he was my first ever coach. He was a close friend of mine. He did the opposite to you. He went from coaching and he's now semi-retired into teaching psychology. Yeah, he coached me at a barbecue. One of the things actually that you were talking about, the objects and stuff, like we're in a kitchen. He's like, open that cupboard, get 6 things out, place them on the table, tell me who they are and why you place them where they are. And yeah, that just started my coaching journey.
Oh, excellent. Nice. Well, it's lovely to meet you. And thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on.
Pleasure. Take care then. Bye-bye, Chris.
And until next time, remember, to lead requires us to continuously